accusation in your eyes.
My name is Hugo Brady. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for European Reform, which is a foreign policy think tank based here in London, but has a European and indeed a global focus as well, or ambition. We think the EU is a jolly good idea, but in many cases and in many ways does not work well. It could be made to work better. The main players in this world are, as you will probably no doubt find in the course of the inquiry, not in the habit of making a generous disclosure of their activities. These are intelligence people, police officers, judges, officials and so on. If I may suggest some radical things, it's because I think that they may sound radical now, but in 10 years' time these things have an odd way of becoming reality, and I prefer that they were well thought out and well considered as opposed to being implemented in the throes of a crisis, as we've seen with the European arrest warrant, for example, in the wake of September 11th and other subsequent measures adopted in the wake of subsequent terrorist attacks. The Stockholm Programme is an 84-page long document, incredibly, I suppose, comprehensive is the best way of describing it. But actually, if you read the document, as I know you have, it's difficult to take specifics from it. The EU seems to have gotten much more powerful in the area with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, but it becomes less and less clear what the EU is actually going to do with these new powers, apart from some rather nasty fights with the European Parliament over data privacy to do with SWIFT and other matters. And we'll see that trend continue for the next 5 years. One of the criticisms, which I'll get to later, is that I feel sometimes the EU's thinking is very ambitious. The Member States are excited by a lot of technological projects, for example, when the politics of JHA is becoming more difficult. And that, for me, finds its best expression in the hardening of public attitudes towards immigration, which, whether officials in Brussels like it or not, they might call it free movement, but anybody else, and the man on the street, calls it immigration. So we have to keep an eye on those political developments. JHA since Lisbon will become more political, and that will not always be a pretty sight. I must also recuse myself from too much discussion of the emergency crisis response proposals for natural disasters and those issues, because it is not really an area in which I focus.
And you don't want to talk about the response to natural disasters, which is understandable. And you don't want to talk about the response to natural disasters, which is understandable.
You talk about the fact that this was a global issue, and that we would be needing to make progress whether the EU existed or not.
Would you agree that part of achieving the security of the EU is securing and enhancing the quality of life in the EU, and that this directly relates to the issue of rights and human rights and the rest?
Usually these documents always have a line in them saying that, of course, with full respect to fundamental rights, we're going to do X, Y and Z. But there's a big battle coming in the EU over the issue of fundamental rights. For example, we're going to see it this year in terms of data protection. And the various EU information exchange systems that have appeared in response to the need for example, the exchange for criminal records. If you ask a citizen in a survey, do you support greater cooperation between national police forces against terrorism and organised crime? And of course they'll say yes. But if their door is kicked down in the middle of the night by the say-so of a judge in Bulgaria, they might have other things to say about that. So it's, public opinion surveys are no good on this issue. You must use your judgment. As free movement really has opened up a totally new law enforcement environment. One of the areas that I feel will be important for the future is over-regulating freedom, or over-regulating for security, because the Commission is taking a single market approach to justice and crime issues. The Commission is taking a single market approach to justice and crime issues. For the first 10 years, the EU focused mostly on what we would call repressive measures: criminal asset seizure, extradition, evidence exchange. Now the focus is swinging from the repressive to the you could say protective or protection of rights. There is a large element, you'll see it in the Stockholm Programme, the Action Plan and other documents, moving towards the idea of establishing a European Judicial College. But on that, I have no particular comment. I would be slightly sceptical of the idea myself. The idea that if we got all the judges together in one place and trained them how to properly apply European law, you don't train a judge in the common law. Judges may discuss between themselves the proper application of the law, but that is not for a regulator to do. These are controversial matters. The internal security strategy is largely a summation of ongoing activities, things that are happening anyway, but may have not yet come to fruition, such as a great number of information systems for organising information sharing between the Member States' police forces. It should be remembered that there's only six forms of centralised information gathering for police and security purposes in the EU. There's the Customs Information System, the Visa Information System, which is not even law enforcement based solely. There's the SIS2 system, which has not come online yet. And there's Europol and Eurojust. One of Europol's jobs is to help the member states scan the internet for Islamic websites related to Islamic terrorism. But in some cases, they haven't been able to pass information back to the member states because the websites mention specific individuals and their data protection rights might be breached, such as Osama bin Laden, and their data protection rights might be breached, such as Osama bin Laden. I do get the idea that there is a sense of urgency. For example, OLAF has become a lot more productive in recent years, despite hiccups and problems with leaderships and a tragedy with the death of their director. Europol has been on the go now technically for 20 years, although only really in the past 5 years has it really made a play to be taken seriously by the other police forces. So there's a hunger out there. We have an EU cyber security agency or information network security agency called ENISA, also not a huge success, and based on the island of Crete, in a country with not incredible broadband.
Obviously, September the 11th bombings in the United States gave a great shove to this whole area of security. Should we be thinking about parallel arrangements with other parts of the world, obviously Russia, China, India, emerging markets, big emerging markets, and of course the Middle East, where there's a particular focus, and maybe Africa, where there are a number of failed states? Any thoughts on priorities and the way we might proceed in that regard?
Well, that's a big issue, and linked to the issue we talked about earlier about the external priorities. My own view is that once you move outside the EU, things slow down. That even we've been cooperating. Many European countries have intimate links with Russia, for example, very pragmatic links, but they've taken an awful long time to develop, and they're mostly based around liaison officers. One of the big value-added areas that the EU has tried to offer the member states, for example, in the field of migration, has been through agreeing legal readmission agreements with third countries like Pakistan and Turkey on taking back illegal immigrants or migrants who transit through their countries. The EU has just signed a very ambitious agreement with Turkey on this. It's absolutely essential to secure deep cooperation with Turkey, because if, as might be the case, the negotiations on Turkish membership of the EU do not go well, and seeing as the JHA chapters are always the last ones to be agreed in any negotiation, it would be essential that we deepen our links, as it's been happening over the last few years on terrorism in particular. But it's really essential, for example, that the agencies work more closely with Turkey. And that, in my view, is the priority. Pakistan is a perennially difficult partner for this country as much as the EU as a whole. And Africa, West Africa, has clearly been laid out as a priority. When you get into areas like China, I'm afraid I don't have any comment on that because it's too far outside my experience. And Russia operates again by its own rules, and based very much around. It doesn't really recognise the EU in this sphere, although the recent EU agreements with Russia, which have not been concluded, the so-called four spaces, does include a chapter on JHA.
I want to return to Europol, we were talking about earlier on. Is it an organisation that's now taken seriously and doing serious business with national enforcement agencies?
I think it's working. I think that Europol used to be described, was once famously described by the Dutch police as a black box into which you put things but nothing comes out, into which you put things but nothing comes out. And it is trapped in this essential, this vicious cycle of saying, well, we could give you useful intelligence products if you gave us useful information. I think that their director has done an excellent job of showing that the organisation has purpose, but it will probably take the whole of his term to convert the agency into being sort of okay and useful when it comes to being sort of indispensable. And that, if that happens, that will be the end of a very, very long journey to make Europol something that the Member States take seriously. If you look at or Frontex's, the border agency's development over 5 years, say, and Europol's over 10, there's no comparison. At the moment, it still does appear a bit more like a think tank than a European FBI, but it is getting there.
Do you think it needs additional powers?
I don't think so for the moment. I think that there's a permanent revolution going on in writing all these new laws to change how the agencies work. Its closest working relationship is probably with Eurojust. Again, they're based in the same city in the Netherlands, so that helps. And they have a longer history of working together than some of the other agencies. They should have an EU most wanted list. Why have COSI at all if it's not to decide on priorities? Why have COSI at all if it's not to decide on priorities and to establish a set of targets, if you like? An EU most wanted list should be public, because this is one of the things about COSI that you frequently hear, that it's an unaccountable body operating in a sort of shadowy enclave and taking decisions that nobody knows about. Operating in a sort of shadowy enclave and taking decisions that nobody knows about.
How do you think the Commission approaches the problem which I detect, that some of the counter-radicalisation programmes that are being devised in the psychological dimensions of the security situation are actually being exploited by manipulative people who like disclosing what they are and turning this against the whole cause of achieving security by actually trying to discredit them? In that context particularly, how do you see the work being done, and is there a role indeed, the work being done by the European Union on the relationship of the extraordinarily challenging issues of Pakistan and the very large population within the European Union with Pakistani connections?
Well, radicalisation is one of the issues on which everything you say is wrong, because it's so incredibly difficult. Even in the implementation of Contest 2, UK officials will say back to you that there are two unintended effects of, in certain cases, of counter-radicalisation policy. One of which is that, of course, if somebody knows they're being counter-radicalised, that's likely to radicalise them even further. So they'll see a state, it can end up in sort of ethnic profiling and targeting of certain communities. This is an incredibly dangerous area. I remain rather sceptical about the effectiveness of counter-radicalisation policies, yet you can easily see that it's something which you have to do something. You have to take action at municipal and national level. Most of Europe, counter-terrorism is a G6 plus Denmark plus the Netherlands matter. You have to look at the other systems of accountability in the EU. Well, there's probably three major ones now. One is to have a Justice Commissioner to balance the repressive measures with protective ones. The second is to have a stronger powers to the European Parliament, and the third is to have is to allow the European Court of Justice scrutiny powers or judicial review powers over all of these various things, provided they don't affect the actions of internal security police forces.
Would they ever allow it?
I think that's going to be a mess.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Brady. You've covered a huge amount of ground this morning, and I think you've helped us to find our way through this jungle that we're working our way through at the moment. So thank you very much for sparing us the time.